Hello, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 3 of the Detours in Music podcast. My name is Laura Ruppel, and today I got to sit down with Dr. Sam Ng, Associate Professor of Music Theory at the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music. I hope you enjoy.
My name is Sam Ng, and the last name is an interesting one, which I always have to explain to my students. The last name NG is of Cantonese origin. Cantonese is a Southern Chinese dialect, and it is a tonal dialect, and Ng is actually more accurately pronounced as Ng. I don't even know if you can hear it on Zoom, but it is the lowest of 9 tones. So when I try to explain it to my students, I tell them that they really have to lower their voice and make it very throaty to pronounce it correctly. So I don't even try to say it right. I just say it, the typical Americanized way, which is Eng. Yeah. So that's my name. I have been teaching, I'm an associate professor in music theory, and I've been teaching at CCM since 2008.
Okay. Can you talk about your start in music?
Sure. So I guess my journey in music really started with my father's background, because he was the one who was the most instrumental in introducing me to classical music. So he grew up on an interesting island off the coast of southern China, and the island is called Gulangyu, G-U-L-A-N-G-Y-U. If you Google it, you'll find a lot of very interesting things about this island. So it's a very unique place, and two of its sort of unique features are, I think, to me, especially personal, because I've been there 2 times, and I witness how very interesting this place is when I was very young. So one of the things is that there's a very strong presence of Christianity there. And I think it was because I've read some about it. I'm not sure about all the history that went into it, but it was, I think, after the First Opium War that a nearby city called Xiamen, it was forced to open to the Western world. It became, a trading port, and I think it was then that Western, Christian missionaries came into China through Xiamen and also landed on that island. And the second really interesting feature is then how these missionaries brought with them Western classical music. And so there is just a lot of interest in Western classical music on that island. When I was there a long time ago, I'm talking about almost 30 years ago, you walk around the island, you can hear little kids practicing piano everywhere. And there's a really interesting piano museum there that I heard they house one of Chopin's pianos there. I'm not sure about that, but I think that's what I heard. So my father grew up in an environment where classical music was truly adored. And like I said, you can hear classical music everywhere on that island. Now, he didn't really have a chance to learn formally or take lessons in any instrument, but he himself is very musical. So from my childhood, he really put a lot of emphasis in cultivating, a love for classical music in me and my sister. So back in the 70s in Hong Kong, which is, the British colony where I grew up in, for children to learn music really meant for us to go through the graded levels of the Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music, if that means anything to you or the listeners. It's a big system in the UK, which is still very much in practice today. So I went through the entire system. I went through all the grades, went all the way even up to one of their performance certificates called LRSM. Again, it doesn't mean much in this country to people, but it's supposed to be a big deal there in Hong Kong. So I, practiced the piano pretty diligently, through to the end of my senior year, the end of my high school. And the curriculum that they have there is pretty rigorous in terms of ear training and theory. So it is during those years that I became exposed to, this idea of studying music theory and counterpoint and things like that.
When did you realize you wanted to go into music?
So the year was 1984.
Okay.
I have the precise year down. And the reason I remember it so precisely is because, I was 10 years old in that year, and playing the piano for about 4 years. I started when I was 6. And I didn't mind playing the piano, although I didn't love it. Because, like you said, it's something that, just a lot of children were expected to do. I think more so now, in fact, some schools, when you interview, when the children interview for some of the more sort of prestigious schools, they ask how many instruments that they have started, taking lessons in. So assuming, of course, that, piano lessons are, something that you must have under your belt. But anyway, so back in the 70s, it was not as bad, but I still was expected to, study the piano because of my father's love for classical music. But then, in 1984, something happened to me. And what happened was I saw this movie, Amadeus, right? Which is that movie about Mozart based on Peter Schaeffer, I think. Is that the name? Yeah, it's play. So honestly, I didn't really like the movie very much. But the interesting thing about that experience was that it made me listen to Mozart much more carefully than before. It's not like I had not listened to Mozart before. I definitely had listened to Mozart's music. I had played some of the piano sonatas in those 4 years. But for some reason during that movie, I listened for the first time very carefully to Mozart's music. And I just got completely mesmerized by it. And so I started collecting cassette tapes, if you still remember them. I have some of these tapes that I purchased when I was 10 years old. And so I collected a lot of cassette tapes of Mozart's music. And there was one particular piece, or more precisely, actually, one particular movement that convinced me that I wanted to become a musician when I grew up. And that movement was the finale of Mozart's Jupiter Symphony.
Okay.
I guess when I first listened to it, it drew me in so deep into that piece that I feel like I still haven't recovered from it.
That's a good thing, I think.
Yeah, it's just a wonderful piece. Yeah. So it really was that the experience listening to Mozart's Jupiter Symphony, especially the last movement, that convinced me that I wanted to go into music. Yeah, after I decided that I wanted to become a musician, the question was, doing what though, right? I mean, there are still a lot of options. Did I want to become a performer or something else? I guess early on, even though I was practicing the piano very seriously and going to competitions every year, I just never saw myself becoming a performer because I didn't think that I had the personality. I didn't have that showmanship or desire to, I guess, speak through my piano playing to the audience. I think you have to have that, right? To pursue a career in performance. And so I didn't see myself doing that. But like I said earlier, the ABRSM curriculum has a very rigorous theory component in it. And so I found myself really enjoying doing things like 4-part harmonization and counterpoint. And of course, at that point, I thought that was all that music theory was. I thought, okay, if you are going to go into music theory, basically you're going to teach other people doing counterpoint and harmonization. And so I thought, oh, maybe I should pursue a degree in that and see maybe I could become a music theory teacher, at some level. So yeah, so I did some research about schools in the US. And during the 80s, right, and the 90s, early 90s, when I had to make the decision of where to go to school, I guess in Hong Kong, everybody knew about 3 big schools here in the US during those times. The 3 big ones that everybody knew were Juilliard, Eastman, and Indiana. At least in my circle, everybody was talking about these 3 that I should pursue. So since I didn't really want to become a performer, I didn't think that Juilliard was necessarily the best place to try. not that I had any confidence in at all of getting in. Indiana at that point didn't have an undergrad theory program. I'm not sure if they do now. I don't think they do, but Eastman did. And so it was kind of by elimination that I applied to Eastman and got in. And so I ended up doing all my degrees there.
Interesting. Why did you stay at one school, do you think, for all your degrees?
That's an interesting question. Well, in fact, at the beginning, I really hated my experience at Eastman. It was not because of the school, mostly it was because of downtown Rochester. If you know anything about downtown Rochester in the 90s, especially the early 90s, it was not the easiest place to live. Especially coming from Hong Kong. I grew up in a big city. It was always very exciting. You know, every night there's a lot to do. So I was so used to that kind of lifestyle. And also I was a teenager and I didn't know how to drive a car. And so in my whole first year, my freshman year, I was stuck on one street, basically just crossing the street between the dorm and Eastman School of Music.
Yeah.
Even though I was part of the University of Rochester, was not really in the campus. So there was not much of any sort of campus life going on for me. So that was the difficulty at the beginning. But then in time, I got to meet more friends and really had grown to love the school. My experience there, the education was top notch. And so after I finished my undergrad, though, I went back to Hong Kong and teach in a high school for 3 years.
Okay.
And it was during those 3 years that I decided, I do want to pursue my, master's and doctoral degrees in music theory so I can teach at, the college level. And at that point, of course, the decision was, do I want to go back to Eastman or do I want to try someplace else? And I felt that, I liked Eastman so much that I wanted to go back and get more out of it. And also, I guess that saved me money from having to, travel from Hong Kong to the US to attend the auditions, because at that point, actually, they already knew me very well, that they didn't even require me to come on site for the audition. So I just sent in my application by mail and got admitted and stayed for both my master's and PhD.
What is something you struggled with in your undergraduate degree? You already talked a little bit about the social struggles of living in Rochester, but maybe something more related to music theory.
Yeah, interestingly, I don't remember struggling too much with my academic studies. I enjoyed my studies thoroughly. I think most of my struggles really had to do with adjustment to a new culture and speaking a new language. Yeah. So growing up in Hong Kong, even though, we were a British colony at that point, English was not really spoken as a first language. And it was mainly just taught as a subject at school, right? So it's not used much in daily life situations. And I would say that I'm not especially gifted at learning languages. So it took me a long time to feel more comfortable speaking the language and feeling less self-conscious about it, especially when I have to talk in front of people. And the fact that I still am in some ways, an introvert, right, certainly didn't help with that. In terms of culture, the difference between Hong Kong and Rochester is pretty great. So I think one of the things that I struggled the most with was just the idea that we were expected in class to speak up, right, to express our opinions. And because back in Hong Kong in the Chinese culture, as students, we were expected to just, sit quietly to listen to the teacher and absorb all the materials instead of having to regularly express our opinions on things. And so, it took me a while to get used to the idea of, having actual conversations in class, expressing myself in a foreign language. But I mean, I think I've made some progress in that area. I mean, I'm brave enough now to do a podcast interview.
Yeah. What is some advice you have for younger students when things aren't going as expected?
So, I'm not sure if I'm the best person to answer this question because I'm much more of a theorist than a performer. But I will say, though, that thinking back to my earlier days when I was still practicing, 5-6 hours a day. I mean, I had those days, a long time ago when I was playing much more seriously and had the time to do so. And I was performing in recitals also. I do remember going through long periods when I felt that I was not making any progress. So of course, those days were really frustrating. But then I think what brought me some comfort during those frustrating times was that I had, a pretty tight-knit group of friends, especially in my church. And whenever we had social gatherings, and being the introvert that I was, I would always sit at the piano. Like I was saying, I felt comfortable sitting at the piano to communicate with others, even though I may not always feel comfortable, carrying an actual conversation with others, being the introvert of the group, and also sometimes just not wanting to have to speak in a foreign language, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I would just a lot of times sit at the piano to entertain myself and also try to entertain people. And one thing that I remember is that my friends would always come to tell me how much they appreciated my playing. And I'm talking about non-musicians also.
Mm.
For some reason, they always enjoyed hearing me play, commenting that they liked the tone that I produced from the piano. I remember one particular comment, which was that you have such a nice touch, as opposed to, when other people play the instrument, you just have this nice touch and a nice tone. And I always appreciated those comments because when I took piano lessons in Hong Kong, I studied with somebody who, and he's a fantastic piano teacher. He's still teaching today very actively in Hong Kong at the Hong Kong Academy for Performing Arts. A very well-known and well-respected pedagogue by the name of Gabriel Kwok. He was very passionate, very focused on teaching the students to produce a beautiful tone, right, from the instrument. And so while I was struggling to make progress and I felt like things were not going as expected, I would just always hold on to that and remembering that, each of us has been gifted in a certain way, that we have our unique strengths as not just people, but also as musicians, right? So, I appreciate my friends, doing certain things musically that I'm not able to do. But at the same time, I also realize that I produce a better tone than some of my friends do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think for me, I was really just trying to hold on to that, appreciating and embracing this gift that I have been given, and not to dwell on the things that I was not doing well.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, it still takes a lot of patience and hard work to improve in the areas that we were not doing well, that I was not doing well. But I guess in a nutshell, I was trying to focus much more on the positive and much more, turning sort of outward, in the sense that I was trying to focus on using what I could do well to bless others, to communicate with others that way, than dwelling all the time on the things that I was not able to do. It gave me, a lot of strength and I guess hope also that things will go well and with a lot of hard work. But of course, there are other things that after all these years, I'm still not able to do.
Yeah.
Because I think we all experience at a certain stage that you plateau in your progress. And that's okay. I mean, I still enjoy, the things that I am able to do at the piano, and other things that I'm not able to do, I'll just, listen to other people do them instead.
I think the idea that you don't have to be perfect to be effective, because you're saying you're still able to give the music, and it's still enjoyable for a lot of people, even if it's not as good as the best pianist ever.
Absolutely. Yes.
What would you be doing if you weren't a musician or weren't a theorist?
So the first thing that comes to mind is that I would love, and my wife is going to laugh if she hears this, I would love to be a homeschool dad, actually. We do homeschool our children. I have 4 children, and I would say that I'm addicted to them. So I would love to stay home and be a full-time teacher of 4 students.
Yeah.
That would give me a lot of joy, a lot of excitement. But having said that, I actually don't know if I have the ability to do it well, because just seeing my wife do it every day and doing it so well
Mm-hmm.
while taking care of so many other things in the house, I think I probably will find it too difficult for me to go into this profession.
Yeah.
So I would say that between my wife and I have the easier job. But I've also had other thoughts too. I think years ago, I kind of had this wish that I had gone into architecture because I love looking at buildings.
Mm.
These days, I don't know. I think I appreciate food more than buildings. So maybe, if I have to go to a different profession, I think being a chef is something that seems very appealing to me.
Have you changed your career focus in your professional life?
Yes, sure. I think I have. So before getting tenured, as they say, publish or perish, I would say after I received my tenure, I have tried to focus a bit more on thinking about my teaching.
Mm.
Just thinking, what I'm doing well, what I'm not doing well, and really what is the purpose of my teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and when I say teaching, I'm not just talking about teaching music theory. I'm really talking about teaching in a sense of modeling for my students how I conduct myself as a person,
Mm-hmm.
first and foremost. And I would say that that is really the more important and the difficult part of my teaching than teaching music theory. Of course, I still love teaching music theory. I still see that as a very important part of my job. But just being a person that makes an impact in my students' lives, I think, is something that I've come to realize is a huge responsibility that I have to take very seriously.
Mm.
So just to give you an example, recently I had a conversation with my worship pastor at my church, and he went to school, he went to university to do music composition and theory. And so, we sometimes talk about music theory and our experience and what he remembers from his undergraduate days. And he said this, he said that the music theory professors that had left the most positive impact in his life were the ones who took an active interest in him as a person,
Mm-hmm.
but not the ones who could teach music theory well. In fact, the ones that he said took the most active interest in his life were the ones who taught music theory terribly.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the ones that he remembered the most fondly of. So that really shows me that, yes, I want to teach well. I want to teach the subject matter well. But really what matters the most at the end of the day is whether I am, as a human being making a positive impact in other people's lives.
Mm.
And that really humbles me, because whenever I think about that, I feel so insufficient. I feel so unworthy
Mm.
of this responsibility. So I guess, the question was, whether I've changed focus in my professional life. And that definitely is a very big change.
Mm.
Focusing on my research, my output as a scholar, as an academic, to, really looking at my job as a position that I have been given to make an impact in the minds of the lives of young people that I've been privileged to come into contact with.
Yeah, that's very powerful and a big responsibility, like you said, but I'm sure the students appreciate you being conscious of that. Looking back, are there detour moments in your life?
So I guess detour, I first need to define detour, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I guess Merriam-Webster would say that detour is deviation from a direct course or usual procedure.
Mm-hmm.
And in that sense, I would say no. I don't think that there are detour moments in my life. And the reason is because I believe that everything that happens in my life all contributes to my ongoing process of becoming what I should be and what I want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that sense that I don't see anything as deviating from a direct course, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
after all, I think about this and I have to question, what is a direct course though? Who gets to define what a direct course should be, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I don't know that I can define the straight line, that direct path for myself.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense that I don't see anything as a detour. I think everything, has a role to play in my trajectory, in my life trajectory. So I guess, I mean, I know where my goal is and I'm heading there, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole journey is one in which, all the components, all the things that I've experienced have their, and here's a term for you, Laura. I
Mm-hmm.
think they all have their formal function. They have their structural function, right?
Mm-hmm.
That play and they all fit together that lead me toward that final cadence of my life.
Do you have any other goals for your job right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I've touched on that a little bit, but I guess to expand it a little bit more, I'll tell you a story. I think this is a very interesting story for myself, and I'd like to share that. So, about 2 years ago, I reconnected on Facebook with a student of mine who took a class with me in 2005 at LSU, Louisiana State University, which was the institution that I taught previous to my job at CCM. So 2005, it was a long time ago, and I had not been in touch with this person. But he sent me a message on Facebook in response to something that I shared. And
Mm-hmm.
he told me that he was about to finish his doctoral degree in Christian music ministry. And he wanted to thank me for inspiring him to embark on that journey. And I was really confused because I don't recall having any conversation with him about what he wanted to do with his life or
Mm-hmm.
any spiritual topic at all. So I asked him how that happened, and he explained to me that it was the way I taught this music theory class. It was one music theory class that he mentioned, that he said that somehow the way I taught it made him feel like he was being discipled,
Mm,
and
okay.
that motivated him to become a music minister. And to this day, I still don't quite understand how that worked, how
Mm-hmm.
that was the case. So I just thinking back those years, I just remember myself being, kind of naive and a young professor who was struggling with my new professional role, right? I was still navigating this very new environment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think what this taught me is this, that is, again, teaching music theory is not just teaching music theory. It is also teaching other people, something bigger than just music theory.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we do that consciously. Sometimes we may be doing that subconsciously just by the way that we treat other people. So again, I will just reiterate that I'm privileged in having been given a position that really inherently has an impact in other people's lives one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's a very humbling thought that I've been given, such a big role. And yeah, so my goal is really to, fulfill this role so that hopefully, in 10 years, I'll hear from my students today
Mm-hmm.
telling me that, oh, the way that you taught that music theory class had really left a deep impression, in me that had made a positive impact in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how well I'm doing that. I'm, of course, everyone is just trying to do their best, right? But just having that in mind, being very conscious of that, and making hopefully a positive impact in other people's lives, not just as musicians, but really as people,
Mm-hmm.
is really, my big goal. And for your listeners, I would also, give a more cryptic answer. I won't elaborate on this, but for those who are very interested, I would just say this. What motivates me and what I do, and really the big goal of my life is this. 1647, England, question 1. And if you can't find the answer, you can also put in these letters. WSC. Then you know what I'm talking about.
Okay. I don't, but maybe someone does.
Someone can Google it. I'm sure you'll find the answer.
Okay.
I was looking through those quotes, and one of them really interests me. And I mentioned that I went into music because of Mozart, right? So I guess I have to do the Mozart quote. The Mozart one says, "It is a mistake to think that the practice of my art has become easy to me." Of course, we have this understanding, this image of Mozart, being this genius who does everything so easily that he doesn't have to labor, he doesn't have to work, right? And I don't believe that's true, although I do believe that, some of the things that he does really come to him very naturally. I still think that he has to work and labor and toil and study very intently and work very hard to achieve what he achieved. But it is an interesting question to consider because in my thinking about Mozart, especially Mozart's rhythm, I think he achieved something that is really remarkable in that his rhythm sounds so meticulously calculated on the one hand, and yet so utterly natural on the other hand. It's a perfect balance between what you set out to do very purposely, but also what you can do without thinking about it consciously. It just comes to you very naturally.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there's a really interesting marriage between those two. And it also reminds me of an article that was published a long time ago by a scholar named Edward Lewinsky. The article is just simply titled "On Mozart's Rhythm." And in the article, Lewinsky talks about how Mozart's rhythm, again, the idea is that it sounds so natural, it sounds just so necessary that you can't imagine it to be anything else, that it's just how it ought to be. And he cites the last movement of the D minor piano concerto, K466, as an example. But if you study the rhythm and the phrase design, you realize that there are a lot of very unusual things that happen there in terms of the phrase lengths and how Mozart deletes certain things and expands other things. The proportions are very, very unusual and asymmetrical. I don't know if you recall, but the other day in one of our classes, I was talking about the idea how asymmetry is sometimes really necessary in order to promote a sense of balance. And in Mozart, you see that happening so much that you feel like, wow, this is very balanced. But if you look at the phrases, they are not of the same length. Actually, one phrase is so much longer and louder than the other one. And how is he able to create a sense of balance, a sense of necessity, though? So I think Mozart definitely has to labor and toil and study and think very hard in achieving these things. But of course, there's also strong evidence that he doesn't have to, think as hard as other people do when he does these things. So that quote really, I guess, drew my attention because I have, of course, pretty much my whole life really enjoyed listening to Mozart, and I have enjoyed thinking about these things, how he's able to just create such a sense of, art in which the natural and I guess the effort, the man-made, come together so beautifully. I think the whole thing, the whole interview really gave me a chance to, in fact, to think deeply about what I'm doing, why I'm doing what I'm doing. And it's always important to remind myself, my mission as a music theory professor, as an academic, what I truly want to do with this position, this role. Yeah. So thank you for this.
Thank you. I hope you all enjoyed that interview. It was great for me to get to talk to my theory professor for the first time outside of a Zoom class. And I just wanted to read out loud one thing that Dr. said. I want to teach the subject matter well, but really what matters the most at the end of the day is whether I am, as a human being, making a positive impact in other people's lives. And I just wanted to say, I think just by having that thought and by saying that to me and to my listeners, you are already making a positive impact in a lot of lives. If you'd like to keep up with the podcast, there are multiple ways you can do so. First of all, you can go to our website, which is detoursandmusicpodcast.weebly.com. You could also subscribe to our YouTube channel, also called Detours and Music Podcast. We also have a Facebook page and Instagram account where you can like and follow us. The Detours and Music Podcast is available everywhere that you listen to podcasts, but on Apple Music podcast apps, you can subscribe and rate us. If you ever want to get in touch with me and give more direct feedback, you can email me at detoursandmusicpodcast@gmail.com. As always, thank you for listening, and I hope you catch the next one.